Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. In this episode, we open Comedic Kidnapping Month with a look at the king of comedy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hello.
I hope you're ready. I hope you're ready for some good old American fun. Oh man! So, thought we would go ahead and finally talk about the man we constantly tell to suck it at our new outro. This movie is on my list for a couple of reasons. One, because it's Scorsese. Two,
you like to torture me.
Well, and I mean, I'm curious to see if you were even really tortured with this one. The thing is, like, I didn't grow up watching a lot of his movies because most of it's like really hardcore gangster stuff. So I wasn't like old enough to watch it until pretty much my teen years. But he's known for like gangster movies. But when I got into his, his portfolio, so to speak, his movies, I feel like that's kind of unfair because in my opinion, he's way more interesting and better as a director when he's not doing gangster movies. Like this movie in particular and some other ones, like one I haven't seen yet, After Hours, where it's like, almost like a adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, but like in like downtown. And like I like him better when he's doing non-gangster movies because I feel like he's pretty good at being inventive and stuff. And even really recently, like he did that movie Hugo that was like a kid-friendly movie based on like a kid's book or something. It's like I like him better when he's doing that sort of stuff. I still really like Goodfellas and everything, but I feel like he's kind of pigeonholed into like a genre when he's done a ton of different kinds of movies. But like in top of all of that stuff too, he's kind of from a school of film we haven't really talked on the show a lot. I've mentioned in past episodes how directors are not only formed by like what they're good at, but also what schools they went to. And we've talked a lot about like people from the West Coast and Texas and Canada and all these other different places, but we haven't really talked about NYU people. And that's where he went to school. He's probably, like, besides Spike Lee, he's probably, like, their biggest filmmaker out of NYU that I can think of off the top of my head. And I feel he's kind of emblematic of... Oh.
I was going to say, you want to hear a fun fact? I almost went to NYU. I got into NYU.
That's it? Why did you end up... Was it, like, a money thing? Or was it... Because I'm curious... Okay.
Yeah, it was a money thing. Basically, BU just gave me a lot more money.
There you go. I don't know, man. I don't think I got into NYU. I don't remember. But it wasn't my top pick. They're kind of one thing we're going to discuss a lot in this, partly because of what your perception of Martin Scorsese is like pretension, and I feel like people, and I didn't go to NYU, but just sort of the outsiders' perception of it is they kind of are more into like European art house sort of stuff. Like they're more likely to get into things like French New Wave and things like that. And I feel like that's also kind of the sort of stuff that's Scorsese was really into. And it's funny too, like, USC, there was like a whole wave of filmmakers like Coppola and Spielberg and Lucas and all these people that came out of there, but they were mostly trying to kind of make movies based off of, like fun movies that they really enjoyed when they were kids.
Right.
I actually recently just watched on Disney Plus right now, there's an Industrial Light and Magic documentary, and hearing them talk about it really just kind of reinforces like they really enjoyed the fun, popcorny sort of mass appeal of movies.
Right.
Strangely, I feel like filmmakers from Texas are the ones that are more experimental, because when I think of like Texas filmmakers, I think of like Wes Anderson or I think of
me, obviously. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, for sure. No, but I'm blanking. It's the guy who did School of Rock, and he did the Before Sunrise trilogy and stuff. But it's funny. People from like Texas seem to like they're more like hippie filmmakers. From
Richard
what it seems
Linklater.
Like. Thank you very much, Richard Linklater. Like in him with like Boyhood and the whole. What if the actors age naturally instead of doing it with makeup? So it takes like 12 years to make the movie. Strangely enough, that seems to come out of Texas more than anywhere else. And then
there's
NYU,
nothing else to do here.
Yeah, but NYU, again, I didn't go there, but every filmmaker I can think of from NYU, it's always like crime movies or like, things that are a lot more subdued than kind of mainstream cinema. Not a lot of special effects, some clever camera work, which we'll get into with this. But we'll get more into that once we say what we're having to drink. So this time, so for this, I want something simple, and I was paying attention to the movie because I was like, does anyone drink anything specific? And no one named any drinks. But I did notice during Jerry's little dinner date at the end of the movie that his fan had poured them some white wine. So close enough. And I don't even think I've had white wine on the show yet. So I decided to go with a Butterkiss Chardonnay from Cupcake Vineyards in Livermore, California.
See, I love me some Cupcake Vineyards. Very good. Very good choice. So
excellent.
I was going to have a martini because to me that sounds very New York show businessy, but I didn't have any of the stuff really to make a martini except for the vermouth. So I made a martini with whiskey and vermouth because I, much like the protagonist of our movie, am trying desperately hard to make something work that's just not happening and hoping for the best.
Sounds like you're grasping at straws. Is whiskey in a martini actually like... Is that I know gin and vodka are usually the thing, but is whiskey like an acceptable martini?
I don't think so. It's not even
option?
The same color, and it's not even normal whiskey. I had apple whiskey, so it's apple whiskey and sweet vermouth. And
whatever, close enough to an appletini, right?
I followed what is that recipe? I think it was on Smirnoff's website, and they were like, "Ooh, do a lemon twist." Well, I can't make a lemon twist. So
okay,
so I just cut off the end of the lemon and threw it in there. There we go. That'll give you my lemon twist.
Well, here's the funny thing. So apple whiskey, I don't know if you know what the state fruit is in New York.
I'm betting it's apples.
Yeah, there's a reason New York City is called the Big Apple. Like Apple is like the whole New York thing. So close enough. At least it's related to the state. But anyway, so
okay, maybe it's
we are
whiskey.
talking.
Maybe it's the whiskey, but I just thought of something. I was watching something, I don't remember the other day what it was, but they were like, pack your bags, we're going to the Big Apple, Vancouver. And they were like, that's not the Big Apple. No.
That's the big maple syrup.
That's that Big Apple's New York. No. I think it's Vancouver. Like the Windy City is where things are always changing. The Sunshine State is when you're in a good place of mind, and the City of Angels is where strangers pay your parking tickets. And I don't know where this woman was going with this. And it was something on YouTube, but I tried to say that because you mentioned the Big Apple, and it made me laugh. So there we go.
I shouldn't have said maple syrup. It makes more sense if it's the big maple.
Yeah, just
it's only slightly. So I don't know. Apparently, we have some listeners in Canada, so you guys are officially from the Big Maple.
You're from the Big Maple,
just adjacent. But so we are talking about the King of Comedy, the 1983. Apparently, it debuted in like Iceland in 1982. I don't know why it was listed that way on IMDb, but I mean on the movie itself it says 1983, so I'll go with that. 20th Century Fox did it. It bombed big time. Budget of $20 million, which I'm guessing has to do with shooting in New York and probably having Jerry Lewis as on there. But it only grossed worldwide $2.5 million, so did not do great.
Wow.
Yeah, so and that's part of the reason I don't think people talk about this one as much. I've seen it referenced a lot by for instance, Family Guy, I mentioned Jerry's dinner date, and if you guys, anyone listening, remembers the episode of Family Guy where Meg has a crush on Brian and like ties him up and forces him to eat a hair pie, and like she's directly quoting lines from this movie. So like people know about this movie, and it like critics like it and everything, but this is not a movie people think of when they think of Martin Scorsese. But it has a stacked cast. You got Robert De Niro, you've got Jerry Lewis, you've got Rita Keene as Diane Abbott, you've got Sandra Bernhard as Masha, and even though, and this is another thing that we're going to talk about throughout this episode, one thing I'm going to kind of go forward, I think that ILM documentary got me thinking about this, but one thing that really gets on my nerves is like when people kind of rope every aspect of the movie as like the director's fault.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of this too, but it's not true. It's like, and I'm thinking of it with that ILM documentary because the special effects in like Star Wars and all these other movies are such a big part of those movies. And they were done by people like Phil Tippett and all these other cast of like people behind the scenes that, when you think of Star Wars, it's like, oh, George Lucas is a genius. He didn't do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
He certainly wrote the movie and, he directed the first one, but it's not just him. It's like whenever, especially like with like film people, it's like the director's responsible for everything, and that's really not the case.
That's why I've kind of always been like, I don't understand the Best Director award, because I'm like, were they on set like scoring on how well he communicates? I've never understood that.
Well, I've like mentioned this before, but the director, like they do have a job. People kind of think of them as like the author of the movie. What they're in, it gets, auteur theory is BS in my opinion, but like if you're going to be specific about what the director's job is, they work with the actors. So like I always tell people, if you see a movie with good actors doing a bad job, that is the director's fault.
Yeah.
And same thing, if you see an actor you hate doing a really good job in a movie, that is also the director's fault. So like, again, yeah, like these days directors are kind of like, oh, they're the ones who did everything, and I think part of that is kind of the tendency for directors to write the movies they're doing. Mm-hmm. So then there's sort of this, but specifically they're kind of responsible for the actors. Obviously, right. They have a hand in everything because it's, they're kind of the one putting the production together. But if you're talking about specifically what their job is, that's what it is. And that's also why on sets, directors are the only ones who are allowed to talk to the actors, because they are the ones who are specifically supposed to work with the actors. But I bring that up because this was not written by Martin Scorsese. It was written by Paul D. Zimmerman, mm-hmm. which he's barely written anything. But one earlier credit I thought was incredibly funny was he used to write for Sesame Street. So fun little connection there. A guy who used to write for early episodes of Sesame Street wrote this movie.
Well, I mean, that makes sense that, there's like no profanity in this movie.
Yeah, honestly,
which I I found very refreshing, really.
No, and again, like I honestly think it's unfair to Scorsese because again, like his catalog of films is very diverse, and I know he's known for his gangster movies, but every time I see like another one that I actually think you would really like is he did a remake of Cape Fear. And I watched that a few years ago. I think it was during like the start of the pandemic. It was on Netflix or something. Right. And I think you'd really like it. And it's more of like a thriller with like and Robert De Niro's in it is like the escape. No, he's let out of prison, but like the prisoner who's looking for revenge. But and that too. I don't know if you noticed Scorsese's cameo in the film. Did you pick that up?
I didn't, mostly because he mostly seems to find my blind spot. Well, I'm going to be shady this whole episode. Just buckle up,
he looks so
listeners.
Different. Well, he looks really different in the 80s. Nowadays, he's like this shrimpy old guy with like big glasses and stuff.
He looks like the guy from Up now.
Pretty much. But back in those days, he looked very different. So at the end of the movie, when Rupert Pupkin, excuse me.
Yeah, I was like, wow.
When Rupert Pupkin was getting to be on the Jerry Show, and they're looking at his like jokes, and they're like are you sure that this joke's not good enough or whatever. So the director of the TV show is Martin Scorsese, and he's like the one where he's like, I think it's funny. Also, Scorsese's mom voices Rupert Pupkin's mom. So every time she's like, keep it down in there, that's Scorsese's mom.
Right.
So I thought that was cute.
That's kind of interesting. Well, I mean, a lot to unpack there about how he feels about his own mother.
I don't know. He might have just wanted his mom in the movie. This did not win any Oscars or anything. It won one BAFTA and 3 awards total, but no Oscar gold or anything. I mean, that's actually kind of a fun thing. I don't know if you know about T, but he didn't win an Oscar until Goodfellas. Like a lot of other directors were sort of like outraged on his behalf that he'd made all these like great movies and he'd still never been recognized. So that was kind of a big thing when Goodfellas came out. It's like, oh man, after like 20 years, he finally won an Oscar. And I think that's still the only one he's... No. I think he might have won for The Departed. But it's like he
won. I know he won Best Picture for The Departed.
Best Picture. Maybe it wasn't Director. I know he was up for Best Director. But anyway, like that's kind of another thing I feel like you and probably a lot of other people don't realize is he hasn't really been an awards darling. Like he's been nominated tons of times, but he really hasn't won like a ton of Oscars. And again, like with his peers, like all these other famous directors were actually kind of like, well, why isn't Scorsese won an Oscar? So there's that. What did you think of them? What did you think of the movie, T?
So it was shockingly not bad.
See, when I knew I wanted to show you a Scorsese movie because I know you haven't watched a lot of I think you said you've seen like Taxi Driver and some of his gangster movies.
A mutual friend of ours, we were working late in the lab at BU one time, and he was like, oh, Taxi Driver. And I think I had to like wait like an hour or something for my stuff to even like render. And so I rented it and we watched it there. And that was my first experience like ever.
It's definitely... It's one of my favorites from him. I feel like it's a lot of people's favorites from him. He really likes kind of unhinged characters, as we see from this one. And that too, like he was inspired by a lot of stuff that was going on at the time too, like the whole, or no. Well, he did the whole like assassination attempt was actually based on some attempts that he'd witnessed, but it's funny that it ended up inspiring another attempt.
Yeah, there was a whole episode of Family Guy where they have to get, not Family Guy, of American Dad, where they have to get him back on cocaine, because if he wasn't on cocaine, he wouldn't have made Taxi Driver.
But yeah, so if like I knew it was either going to be this movie or Hugo. Hugo would have been fun because it's very like lighthearted and kind of like I still think you would like it, but it's kind of undercutting what Scorsese's known for. And frankly, with this show, I feel like it's more interesting to talk about movies that no one talks about. Yeah. On occasion, we'll do a popular movie. Like 2 episodes ago, we did Mad Max. Yeah. But everyone talks about Goodfellas. Everyone talks about Taxi Driver. This movie or After Hours or something else. It's like it's more interesting. I feel like there's fewer people discussing it, especially this film. I feel like this one's really underrated. But so I'm glad you it sounds like you liked it. Well, yeah, you didn't hate it, but
so I had to divide the movie in half. I mean, I watched it in one sitting, but to me, the movie is kind of really uninteresting up until they decide to kidnap. And then it becomes really interesting. That to me, that's mostly just because I just kind of feel like they make their point really quickly that this guy is unhinged. He's totally separated from reality. And, that he has this fixation on Jerry. And they make that point so quickly. It's like the other 40 minutes of seeing it happen is kind of just like overkill. It's like, okay, we get it. Like, move on. Now, to me, that's kind of what it was. And, maybe I missed something like grand in there, but that was my thing. And it's like, to me, it took too long, I guess, for it to get interesting, if that makes any sense.
No. I feel you there. I think, because I remember, I haven't seen this since the first time I watched it, but it left an impression on me. And part of the reason I was really engaged in it when I saw it was I went into it blind. It was like we were watching it as like a family. Like, I think I was like in high school or something. And my dad's like, oh, you got to see this. And the king of comedy, that's all I knew. And kind of discovering that he's nuts. As you say, they show it early on, but it takes still like 15 minutes or something. And also just kind of seeing how nuts he is, because this is a comedy, and one way that it is sort of, I guess you'd call it, like, the term is comedy of errors, but it's more like it's getting worse as it goes along. Like, he keeps upping the insanity. Like, at first it's just like, okay, he misunderstood Jerry and like wants to call him directly, thinks they're friends or whatever. Okay, now he is going to Jerry's office. Okay, now he's going to Jerry's house. Like, so in that way, it's like just upping the madness every time. And then the thing that really engaged me the first time I saw this movie was, and I don't know if you picked up on this, but it's kind of masterful. I wouldn't call it suspense, but there is sort of this mystery in the air of, is this guy actually a good comedian?
Yes.
Because it's like, and that's the most frustrating thing too, is like, because he's such a likable character despite being kind of crazy, that you just want to be like, dude, just go to a comedy club. Like, if you build a following, like, he'll ask you to come on the show. But obviously, like, he's not being realistic. But for the whole movie, anytime like he's recording his stand-up set or he's doing it in his imagination or whatever, you never hear what he's saying.
Yeah. And
the payoff of finally hearing his set at the end was what kept me going the first time I saw this movie, because I was just like, what if he's really funny? Like, despite being completely nuts, what if he's actually a great comedian? And that's kind of what kept me really engaged the first time I saw this movie. And this little bits, like, most of this movie's like character comedy, like the interactions he's having with people, whether it's like what's her face, Masha, the other crazy fangirl, or whether it's Jerry's staff or whatever. It's just kind of the funniness comes from like how he has this delusion, how he's like talking to people and all of this, and also just like him just not understanding, like when the security throws him out and he's like, I wasn't thrown out. It's like, it's in a weird way, it's kind of funny. It's almost like watching these like people having meltdowns in Walmart on YouTube, just like how do you have such little self-awareness of what you're doing?
Right. Well, and I will agree with you. That was a very, very smart choice by the writer to, keep his comedy prowess, under wraps, because you just assume, because, how weird he is and the fact that it seems like he's never been to a comedy club, you just assume it's going to be bad. And it's really kind of like it's almost like an uplifting moment at the end when you see that he's actually good. People are laughing. His jokes are kind of funny. I laughed a few times.
Well, the funny part is, like, I kind of agreed with Jerry's, because I thought he was good, but I sort of agreed with his assistant, like the girl who's like, because she said like, oh, it's really good. I think you could develop this into something really good. There's a few that don't land, and it's like, yeah, that's pretty much exactly how it is. It's like some of his one-liners were a little forced, but like for the most part, like they were pretty funny. A lot of the jokes about his mother's alcoholism and stuff. It's like that, and that was the thing. Like, I didn't really assume that whenever I saw this the first time, whether I was a teenager or in my early 20s or whenever it was I saw this. Again, like for me, I was thinking, is he good? So that kind of kept me going.
I will say, like, one of the things that bugged me, and this is a personal thing for me, one of the things that bugged me, especially about the first half of the movie, is there's so much happening in his life that's just, it's so embarrassing. And it's like, I really don't want to be here for this. You know what I mean? It's like, it's
cringe comedy. It's like,
there was it wasn't just, it was cringy. It was, oh my God, you're so likable. Just stop. Let it go. There was all like just moments like that. And you just kind of wanted to like Like, I know if that was me and I was doing that, I would just want to, like, shrivel up and die. Like, it was just so embarrassing.
I think what kind of shields me from the feelings is that he's so dissociated for, like, he does not notice how he's coming across. So I feel like that kind of helps it stay.
Well, I know
like,
he doesn't realize how it's
I know
coming
what you
across,
mean.
but I'm kind of like, because until we find out later. I mean, we find out. I think we kind of pretty much guess when the assistant and stuff. You won't see him that it was kind of just a, hey, get out of my car, I'll tell you what you want, just leave sort of thing. But until that happens, especially that opening scene where the guy's going up the stairs or whatever and he keeps yelling after him, I'm like, dude, you have your shot, just stop, you're gonna make it go away. That was incredibly painful to watch. That was physically painful to watch.
Here's a fun fact I learned just when I was like, for the basic info on the episode when I was scrolling IMDb that I actually didn't know. So when he meets Jerry at his house, that whole scene is improvised. So there was no actual it's just like, okay, he's at your house. Like, what do you do? So that whole bit with like Jerry and his golf clubs and like all of that, that's just off the cuff from both of them.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
When I read that, I read that before rewatching the movie, and I forgot what exactly happens. And it's a little less, because most of what Jerry Lewis is doing is just kind of staring at him.
Yeah.
So like that's more impressive from De Niro, because it's like, obviously, I'm guessing what happened was Scorsese probably told him, he's going to tell you to get out of his house. Don't listen to him. Like, keep staying here as long as possible.
Right.
Like, just do not take the hint. And they probably just got the best versions of that. But that's interesting. And again, it kind of goes to the strengths of this movie is its character comedy. It's like, okay, you're at his house now. Like, what do you do if he tells you to leave? And again, like, that's kind of how I felt like some of the best interactions were with him and Masha, because they're both delusional and they both think the other one is delusional. And it's just so funny to, again, like, the lack of self-awareness of how it's like you're both out of your minds.
Right.
Like, and you're able to see it when it's the other person, but not when it's you.
Not when it's you.
Jerry loves me. You're a hack comedian. You'll never, it's like, again, it's kind of amazing acting all around, especially like, and Jerry Lewis did a good job too, but I feel like he is the reason the movie was so expensive. And also, ironically, he barely does any, like, he's considered a comedic legend. He doesn't do shit in this movie.
Yeah. Cause I kind of just thought he was pretty flat in this movie. I don't know, nothing about his performance like wowed me. I was kind of just like, did we need Jerry Lewis for this role? Or could we have done literally anybody else and just made up?
Well, I'm sure he was in mind when they wrote it too, because Jerry Langford, Jerry Lewis, it's like, you know what you were doing.
Well, no, I'm sure. I just am kind of just like, did we need him? Because
no, I actually,
if kind of blah.
Especially if you're gonna like drop a bunch of money on the movie, I would have gone for one of the popular talk show hosts of the time. Like, even if you're going to keep the name Jerry, it's like, I don't know, do someone who's already on TV. That might make it even kind of more cinema verite.
Who were the big talk show hosts at this time?
See, I'm trying to, what was the Tonight Show with, see, that's the thing. Like, oh, you know what? Johnny Carson, I think, was still on TV at that time, wasn't he?
I think so.
Like, here's Johnny. That was in The Shining just 2 years before this movie. So I feel like he must... I don't know. Like, that's the problem with you and I is, like, I know about, like, the big talk show wars of the late 90s. So I know about, like,
right.
Like Conan versus, like, that whole thing. But I've never been a fan of nighttime talk shows anyway. That's one thing about, like, living now is when I just want to see an interview with, like, a celebrity I care about. I don't have to watch some TV show I don't care about. I can just go onto YouTube and watch the interview. The only
way this could have been worse is if they made Lily Singh the talk show host.
Can you imagine if they remade this today and made her the talk show host?
Oh my God. That would be...
It wouldn't be very believable, because I don't think she has any super fans.
Yeah, I think even on her super fan night they had trouble filling seats on her show. I'm trying to. Okay.
Well, the problem is all of her fans are like in their late 20s now. Like they were little kids when she blew up, and that's kind of apparently such a side note we're getting off on. But I feel like that's kind of why she doesn't get views on her YouTube as much as she used to either. Is like, you know, her comedy is kind of for little kids.
You know what? It's okay. He wasn't a talk show host at the time at all. But okay, could you not see him in this role, Bill Maher? I could totally see him as see him as Jerry.
Well, also, I think he would. That's the problem. I think he was like 20 years old when this came out.
That's I'm saying. Yeah, I don't even think he even.
If we remade it today, hell yes.
Yes, hell yes. I could totally see Bill Maher in this role because Bill Maher is already kind of unlikable.
Can we talk about so Jerry Lewis? Like we were talking before we started recording. He was big here, like early television, kind of fell off, but he got really popular in France of all places. But he's sort of like, from the film perspective, I haven't seen any of his films that he directed himself, but they're supposed to be really like visionary from what I hear. And that's kind of why he's so respected in France, not so much from his comedy, but as him as a filmmaker. Well, and I have a feeling that might actually be why Scorsese wanted him. Again, I don't know if the writer wrote him. I would think so since it's Jerry, but I would think Scorsese wanted to work with him because, again, being like a pretentious dude from NYU, he probably wanted to work with him because he was a fan of his films.
Right.
But was he a jerk? Was he like an asshole? Because, you know, like one of the final impressions I got of Jerry Lewis was a few years ago. I think it was like 2016, 2017. So not too long ago, he passed away, and he did one final interview, and he was a jerk. It's still on the internet. You could look it up. He was just shit-talking the interviewer, like just being a grouchy old jerk. What? And it's like, was he always like this, or is this just because he's old? Like, because I'm like, you know what I mean? I really don't know what he was like behind the scenes, but that just made me think, like, was he a jerk?
That's what I'm trying to see. You know, I'm doing anytime I have that question, I always Google the person's name in real life. So I'm trying to see if anybody has said what he was like.
Because again, I didn't, you know, I haven't even really seen any of his films. I should, so if they're as visionary as everyone says they are. But I remember, oh my God, Jerry Lewis died, and he did one final interview. Let me watch this. And just after watching it, I was just like, wow, what a jerk. Good riddance.
This isn't good. Somebody asked the question on Quora: is there a single story about Jerry Lewis being a nice person?
Okay, so he was a jerk.
That's the only way I can interpret that question.
That's kind of, I mean, in that way, he's sort of perfect casting for this, because Jerry sort of is a jerk in the like for the little amount that we've seen him. It's like, on one hand, you can kind of understand why he's like that. You see how crazy people are, just constantly wanting to get his attention. But on the other hand, it's like he's.
Well, they said, so somebody says that, because, you know, Jerry Lewis, I know him as the Jerry Lewis telethon guy. You know, he would raise all this money for charity and stuff like that. So people said, you know, he was like super nice, like in the public eye, but like in private, he was like bitter and mean.
Well, and it's funny too, because his early, you know, like there was, I forget who he co-starred with in the early days of television, but he got famous playing like the doofus character, like the really shrill voiced idiot, you know? So it's like kind of ironic that he's like a pretentious douchebag in real life, because he basically got famous being like kind of.
Have you learned nothing about Orson Welles, sir? You should have followed his example.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah. Well, and that's funny too. Like we'll look into that in the future. But one thing I always thought was kind of extra cool about Orson Welles is he always played a villain.
Yeah.
You know, one film that might be in the running for in the future is The Third Man, where he just plays like this evil person. Or one of my favorite Orson Welles films, Touch of Evil, where he's like a corrupt cop, and it's like it's so funny because he was such a nice guy in real life, and he didn't really have an ego, but he was so good at being like a villain in films, whether they were his or not.
That he was just cast in that role on.
So Jerry Lewis is the anti-Wells, I guess.
Yes, I guess.
Equally celebrated filmmaker. He played a playful idiot on the screen and was a arrogant jerk behind the scenes, I guess.
Well, and then not only that, remember, we have the banned Jerry Lewis film.
Which one was that?
The Day the Clown Cried.
Actually, yes.
I don't think it's even been released yet. I think it's coming up, though.
That was the thing. Was it banned or just has it not been released? Because I've heard about it, but it's
I guess,
and that too. Like, is it also lost media? Like, I thought it was because like a bunch of the negatives burned or something.
I guess. Okay, so it's not technically banned. It's just unreleased. But I think there's some sort of thing. Lewis, he claimed that The Day of the Clown Cried would never be released, but he later donated an incomplete copy of the film to the Library of Congress in 2015 under the stipulation it was not to be screened before June 2024. So it's lost, as in it's not been seen by the public, but it's technically found because it's in the possession of the Library of Congress. But yeah, you were right. It's not a banned film. It was just never released.
Well, mark it on your calendar, because if they make a wide release of it, maybe we should hop on that, dude. Be one of the first people to review it.
I mean,
fight our way to the front of the line.
A drama.
You only hear it on our show, whether it sucks or not.
A drama about a circus clown in a Nazi concentration camp. That just sounds like an upper movie.
I mean, it's essentially, there was that Italian filmmaker who essentially did the same thing in one Best Foreign Film. And then went on to make like that terrible Pinocchio movie.
God.
Because his whole thing was literally the same thing, like this goofy guy in Auschwitz, and he's like just pulling jokes on the... And apparently it's a good movie. I haven't seen it, but like,
right.
There you go. It's like same idea, essentially. One thing I actually think this movie was pretty prophetic about was the whole parasocial relationship thing you see, especially nowadays in the YouTube... Instagram space, where people get this delusional idea that they actually know the person.
Right, because with YouTube and Twitter and stuff like that allows you to essentially bring them into your home. You can even bring them technically into your bed. The most what's considered the safest, people feel like their bed is their safest spot in their home. And then you can even have essentially direct communication with them through things like Twitter. I'm not sure if that was prophetic, because if you look at the way that he meets him, it's in person. It wasn't like he met him I don't know, through Telegram or something.
Well, it's his imagination. And I'm not saying, obviously things didn't work the same way. He couldn't have Jerry, on his phone when he's going to bed and stuff. He can't although, again, if this were remade today and Bill Maher were playing Jerry, obviously Rupert would have a Twitter, and maybe he'd tweet at Jerry and be like, hey, I'm a pretty... maybe he makes a TikTok of his comedy set, and it's liked by Jerry, and then, Jerry asked me to be on his show, But prophetics, maybe not I feel like what I mean is this sort of fandom has existed for a long time. You see the old footage of the women losing their shit at Beatles concerts.
Yes.
But I don't think it was widely seen, especially in cinema. Again, these people have existed and we're aware of them now because of the internet, because they make fools of themselves publicly online. But I feel and it's not like this movie did well, but I feel like this was kind of ahead of its time as far as sort of shining a spot.
Addresses it, yeah.
Exactly, and it's for a joke. The whole point is that it's funny, but I don't think there was really ever a movie about that before that I can think of anyway.
I'm trying to think. I feel like there might have been. I have to do further research.
The thing is, in the 50s and 60s, the idea of fame changed because, there were always famous people, but the idea of these hyper fans, people who were obsessed with comedians or rock stars or something, that didn't exist before. And this was in the 80s, so that had been around for a while. But again, I don't think it was ever really the subject of a movie, maybe a book or something. But again, when I'm thinking of movies that have this kind of narrative of a delusional person following a famous person and thinking they have a personal relationship with them, I don't I can't think of anything, honestly.
Well, what's interesting about the delusional thing is I feel like, what is it called? With having both Masha and Rupert be the two, I guess, unstable people. The good news is it proves a point that not all psychotics are dangerous, because
yes.
I kind of get the impression Rupert was never dangerous. I know he participates in this kidnapping, but he was never going to, or had any plans to, harm at all Jerry. Basically,
exactly.
Jerry was essentially almost just a means to an end. So I'm kind of wondering. No, I can't wonder, because we do have the, well, so it depends on how you look at it, I guess, because those sequences where it seems like he's disassociating and he's thinking all this stuff's happening. Well, no, hang on. I'm trying to think. Now I'm making my brain hurt. I'm overthinking this. So, yes, he is not totally there, but I feel like at some point, and maybe I feel like at the point that Jerry says, I was trying to get rid of you, he doesn't necessarily hate Jerry or want revenge, but I feel like Jerry's status, I think, changes in his eyes from idol to a means. Does that make sense?
Well, no, first off, this is going to be a perfect segue into the next talking point I'm bringing up. But no, I completely agree with you. And again, he's not scary crazy.
Like Masha's scary crazy. Masha is scary crazy.
Yes. So Masha is a borderline rapist. Yes. So that's like a whole thing. No, I would be friends with this guy. I would honestly be like trying to get him to perform at a club, just to be like, you don't need Jerry, man. Like, you can do this without getting on his show. And you're right. And I guarantee the fake gun was probably his idea. And at the end, which I'll bring back near the end of this episode, he even says, like, when he gets famous, like, oh, Jerry, he still considers a close friend. So no, he never had, like, despite his delusions, he, like, even when the kidnapping's going down, he understands what's going on.
Right.
Like, he knows he's going to go to jail. And that's actually one of the best lines in the movie. It's better to live one night as a king than your whole life as a schmuck, or something like to that.
That was a great line.
It's a great line, and it's a great kind of, like, he knows he might have ruined his life, but it's worth it just to, like, do his comedy on TV, even if it's just this once, and then he's locked up for the rest of his life. And in that way, he's strangely cognizant of the repercussions of what he's doing. And again, like, he's likable. Going off of that, we'll go into, because again, perfect segue into my next talking point, which is comparing this to the Joker film from 2019, that apparently no one has seen this movie and no one realized that movie is a bad version of this movie. I'd like to hear your opinions too, or your opinion, excuse me, T, but like, for real, it's like the same movie, except we have a likable character who's non-violent and doesn't end up murdering a talk show host at the end.
Right.
Which is fine, because again, like, the Joker's like a villain origin story, so him doing something unhinged and evil isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I just thought it was so funny, all these people talking about what a deep, thoughtful movie this is, and it's like Todd just ripped off the King of Comedy, but made it violent. Like,
he made it violent, and he kind of made it more of and it depends on which way you follow the debate online. He kind of made it sort of a incel-y apologetics piece too.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem with the movie. Like, I don't think he is defending incels. I don't think he was malicious. Even with copying the movie, I just think he didn't realize that you got to be very, very, very careful showing like a villainous character in a sympathetic light.
Yeah.
Because that film kind of ends with this message that the ends justify the means. It's okay to violently attack someone if they're mean to you. Like early in the film, when he guns down those guys on the subway car. By the way, spoilers for Joker, but I have a feeling most of you have probably seen it anyway. But when he guns down those guys, there's kind of that self-defense. Like, they were going to probably beat him to death if he didn't shoot them.
Right.
But when he goes on to,
sort of an air of ambiguity there as to
the problem is, again, like, he gets invited on a talk show at the end of that movie to essentially get made fun of by the host. He didn't have to agree with it. He didn't have to go, but he goes to shoot him in the face on live TV. And again, it's like kind of almost, again, like, for a normal person watching the movie is like, wow, this is horrific. And it makes sense that he would be the Joker. But a lot of people took away from that movie. A lot of the people are like these incel types where it's like, oh, see, he did the good thing. He killed the mean person who was mean to him. And it's justified because he was mean to him. And it's like, no, he's a murderer. And that's the difference. Again, like, it's there. I don't know if you really picked up on it, but literally that movie is a ripoff of this movie. You have a struggling comedian with mental health issues. He's got a crush on a girl who are both women of color. I thought that was interesting. I forgot his love interest was a black woman in this movie, but same in Joker, his neighbor down the hall.
Right.
And he idolizes this talk show host, and he's, does stand-up comedy. But in literally every sense, it's the opposite. He's a likable character. The girl actually kind of likes him back and is willing to go on a date with him. She just doesn't really like how delusional he is.
Right.
His stand-up comedy is actually competent. That's another thing in the Joker where he goes up and tries to do a comedy set, but it's all him just talking about, like, murdering people and stuff. And it's like, ew, this is creepy and not funny. Yeah. And it's like, okay, And then same thing, like, he has the opportunity to hurt this guy, and no, like, he uses it to kind of take a chance, and he does something very illegal, but no one gets hurt, So it's, I don't know if you picked up on all the similarities, but rewatching it this time especially, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure he completely sat down and, like, totook notes and was like, oh, I'm doing this, but evil.
I'm actually surprised there wasn't actually any legal action. Because to me, it's that similar.
It's wild. It's, again, I thought that when I saw the Joker, but watching it this time for this show, I was like, again, like, even just the littlest details, like his love interest being a woman of color.
Right.
It's like, what is going on?
It's like, again, if I change just enough of it, maybe no one will notice.
Didn't change much at all. It's also, that's the funny part too. Both movies, that one is a period piece set in the 80s. This one was made in the 80s, set in the 80s.
Right.
It's Scorsese. I'm telling you, bro, you can sue him. You can sue Warner Brothers.
Sue him, please.
It's amazing. And again, I think that was his idea. It's like, what if this movie, but the guy's evil and crazy? And again, like, that's part of what I was saying earlier about, I don't think he was trying to be malicious about the messaging of the ending of his film. I thought it was supposed to be kind of like, at least from him as a director, writer, I think he wanted it to be kind of chilling that he murdered someone on live TV.
Yeah.
He just didn't realize there were so many unhinged people that would make him into a heroic character.
But then they also had Robert De Niro in it too. I was like, seriously?
Yes. I swear. But it's so funny. Like, and part of the reason no one made that comparison is, as I said at the very beginning of this episode, this movie bombed. This did not do well. Again, film people, like, movie nerds like you and me.
They like it.
The pretentious, oh, you think Goodfellas is a good Scorsese film. Have you seen The King of Comedy? Those types of people have heard of this movie, but no one's heard it, which is why I guess, they thought it was safe enough to completely rip it off.
Right.
But it's crazy.
Well, I was going to say something I noticed about this movie, and I think I kind of noticed this in other Scorsese movies that I have been unfortunate enough to watch. He really doesn't like color a lot. Like, he made, like, in this movie, he made New York very blah and boring. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but the way the first half of the movie looks, especially, I was just like, yeah, this is a Scorsese movie. Like, I could just tell just by looking at it. And I don't know if you know what I mean.
Well, it was limited locations. Pretty much you could count the locations in this movie on one hand. There's the TV show set, there's Rupert's apartment, or basement he lives in with his mom. There's and that's another comparison with Joker. He's got an elderly mom who anyway. You've got the office of the TV place. You've got New York streets, various. And then you've got Jerry's house. And I think that's literally all of the locations. I might be missing one. So I think that's part of it. I'm kind of going to hard disagree with you, especially like you've seen Taxi Driver. There's a lot of like reds, a lot of neon.
Yeah, but I don't know what it is about it, but he just makes New York seem boring. I don't know how else to describe it.
I kind of know, again, I know what you mean. I think part of it was because limited locations. I also think, especially, again, I don't know how this cost $20 million to make. I'm guessing it was Jerry Lewis, but I'm guessing also that led to them kind of having to stretch the budget a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, like his films in general, I'd say are pretty colorful. It depends on which ones you're talking about. I would agree, like if we're talking about the Departed, that one's pretty color desaturated.
Well,
Taxi Drivers.
Well, see, Taxi Driver is, but Taxi Drivers, I don't know. It's colorful. I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe this. It has different, more colors in it, but they're all, I don't know, they're all similar, so it all comes across as like one tone. Does that make sense? I don't know if any of this is making any sense.
I'd have to go through every one of his movies because
now. Like, we got the time.
Well, Goodfellas is another one. Here's the thing with Scorsese, because I'm a bit of a cinematography nerd. If you haven't listened to any other episodes of the show,
God.
The thing with his movies that I rarely can think. There's the Goodfellas shot everyone talks about, but in general, out of his, catalog that I've seen, his oeuvre, where he's strong, and again, I'm not going to say him specifically, whichever cinematographer he works with, he's good at making the best out of what he has. There's going to Taxi Driver. There's the famous scene where he's in the phone booth and it dollies past the phone booth and stuff. One shot I thought was interesting.
I hated that scene.
Well, one shot I thought was interesting in this one was when they're asking him to leave the office, the waiting room thing, and they go away and they're divided by like a glass door. And again, it's like you can be like overly like, ooh, it's because he's being shut out and stuff. And it's like, yeah, but also, again, like how are you going to shoot something interesting in this very basic space? And that's something he's very good at doing.
Right.
And a lot of it is kind of in those examples I laid out in this, if someone else were directing Taxi Driver, it would have just been like a basic thing in the phone booth. And whether you like it or not, it's memorable and it's unique. You know what I mean? Like
I remember,
and it's like how do you make this interesting? And same thing with the famous Goodfellas shot where it's a dolly or not a dolly, excuse me, a steady cam following him through the back. That was literally because they weren't letting him shoot in the restaurant anymore, or like it was too busy and they were like, I don't know. So that was kind of done to circumvent the fact that they were having issues with the location they were shooting at. It's like, oh, let's just follow him in through the back. And then it became this iconic thing. I don't really think, for my taste, his cinematography has never really wowed me. But one thing, especially if I sit back and I actually pay attention, is he's very good at framing scenes in an interesting way when someone else would have just shot it very flatly, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I can see what you mean. And I kind of, everybody has their own strengths. And I think this goes back to what you said earlier about, I think directors kind of over controlling the picture a little bit. Like, for example, I think Alfonso Cuarón is at first and foremost a cinematographer. I don't think he's a good director. I mean, he was good on the Harry Potter movie I watched, but like when you look at like Roma, the cinematography, that was all that movie was. The great cinematography. And then the story.
You don't like The Little Princess?
Okay. Again, A Little Princess, but he didn't write that. but the cinematography.
No, I know it's based on a book. It's based on a book.
But he didn't even write the screenplay. That was his first English language film. But actually got an Oscar nomination for cinematography again. But I think he's a cinematographer first, and then I think a director third. But because I just think that the movies that he's had more say in, like, the story and everything else, haven't been as interesting of a story. But like, but the point is basically everybody has one. Like you said, Martin's not a fabulous cinematographer, but he's good at framing the shots with what he has.
Well, and again, he's not the cinematographer, so and he might work with a different person on every movie. But again, like, just based on whether it's his decision or not, it was something. What really turned my opinion about Scorsese was watching his student film from NYU. And that kind of gave me the impression he's really big on visual metaphor. Oh my God, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's on YouTube. The guy shaving? Yeah, and for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's called The Big Shave, and it's on YouTube. And it's a metaphor for the Vietnam War. But all it is a guy shaving, and then he shaves some more, and then he shaves some. And again, like, knowing what he's kind of making a joke about is like how we should have pulled out of Vietnam years before we did. But there you go. It's like the whole film is a visual metaphor, and it's kind of darkly funny because you're just thinking, stop, stop shaving. He's like shaving parts of his face off. And It's just like, but that kind of really made an impression on me that's something, I meant, going back to the taxi thing. It's like everyone analyzes the crap out of that as it's like, oh, he's, it's like looking away from the painful thing. I don't know what he was trying to say with that. Or like in this film,
what my
that
friend
shot
said, and it's the reason why I hate it. I don't like my choices being taken away from me. Then the same thing. Let me look away.
Well, and then in this film, like the scene I brought up where he's behind that glass door, from far away. And again, it's like the visual metaphor for me is that he's being shut out. And maybe that's what his intention was. I don't know. But because he likes visual metaphor so much, that's kind of what leads to, again, like, they could have just followed them out the door and then cut to a medium shot in that little area of like, you're going to need to leave, sir, or whatever. But like doing it kind of in that awkward way where they're like far away behind a door, it just makes it more interesting. Whether you want to say it's deep or something, that's really up to you. But that's just something I've noticed in all of his movies, is in very basic scenes that could just be shot reverse shot, he comes up with interesting ways to shoot them that aren't necessarily very mind-blowing or like overdone, but he's very good at like coming up with interesting framing of the scene and blocking and things like that.
Right.
Anyway, tell our listeners what really grinded your gears with Martin Scorsese.
So my issue is very simple. It is a simple protocol. No, but it's basically when I think it was when either the second or the first. No, I think it was the second of the big Marvel movies was coming out. I think it was first off. So it was Endgame. I think they asked him about it, and he was basically like, that's not cinema. It's not about the human emotion or the condition or anything like that. And so therefore it's not essentially, basically saying it's not a real movie. And I had such a problem with that. Like, I'm not a big superhero movie fan. However, I'm a big proponent of pop culture, and I don't believe pop culture is inherently lowbrow. And I feel like he's a person that thinks that. And the other thing is, especially when he was talking about these Marvel movies that he thought were so, devoid of emotion or human understanding or anything, people, I worked at a movie studio at the time. And so, these are like, people who work in the industry who watch, they love movies, they know all this stuff. And they were getting emotional about the deaths of characters, about the prospect of losing somebody, losing one of these characters, because the way they've been crafted and created was so human and so real to them, and it becomes such a part of their lives. It was making them emotional. They were crying about this. They were sobbing in the theater. So, and I was just like, how can somebody who's responsive, who basically is kind of looked up to as this grandfather of cinema, be so judgmental of a point of a form of the art medium he chooses that just maybe doesn't speak to him. To me, there's a difference between saying they don't speak to me, but they're there, and then saying that they're not cinema. To me, those are two completely different things. And the fact that he used his platform to speak out and say that this sort of film is wrong or is not, it should not be classified as cinema, and having millions of upcoming filmmakers hear that and potentially take what he says to heart, I found very troubling and very upsetting. And then also on top of it, he says they don't take any risks, or on top of that, I felt that a very hypocritical statement, because he talks about wanting to save cinema all the time, and then he went and did his swan song magnum opus at Netflix of all places. And then instead of hiring people and taking a chance on new actors for the younger roles, he took people he'd already worked with, already established, already had a following, and then just de-aged them. And so it's very, very difficult for me to watch his films and not just be angered by this man.
For sure.
So
what I did in preparation. So what I did what I did in preparation, because at the time you told me that, and I thought his follow-up interview was pretty good at clearing up a lot of problems people had. And just right off the thing, Wolf of Wall Street, he created Margot Robbie's career, essentially. Like, she was a new actress, and he hired her for that. So that's one thing where, for The Irishman, he didn't hire anybody new. But he has started some careers. Asa Butterfield, was not a known actor until he had him Hugo and stuff. For the most part, I agree with you about the... because I reread his, follow-up and stuff, and he does seem to think he's cinema's about revelation of characters, and you don't get that from superhero movies. Completely disagree with him there. Right. But he does also say it's taste and temperament, and if he had grown up on them, he probably would feel differently. Where I very much agree with him, and I feel like I've talked about this with you, but one thing, because I don't think there's anything wrong with liking Disney movies, but I do think there's a danger in just removing them from criticism when, for instance, on social media, I saw you post a thing about, because a lot of
he's going through my post history. Oh no.
Well, no. So what again, you're not doing anything wrong. You were essentially posting something based on these homophobes who didn't want there to be a lesbian relationship in Buzz Lightyear. But the thing is, Disney cuts that out when they send it to China, because Chinese people don't. And it's kind of the same thing. The second half of his explanation of the whole Marvel is a roller coaster and blah blah blah, and also with the risk he's talking about. A lot of it, I especially am feeling this phase in Marvel, because I watch them a little bit more regularly than you. And he said some things like how the sequels are sequels in name but remakes in theme, and I kind of agree with him there. Where a lot of the Marvel things, it's just the same thing over and over again. But the most important thing he kind of gets into, where I feel like you have kind of a misunderstanding on the man, is Scorsese might have pretentious tastes, but he does not think he's better than anybody else. In his thing, he talked about how he likes a lot of films by a lot of notable filmmakers, and he listed a vast swath of people, including Claire Denis. Where is my thing here? Kenneth Anger, Ingmar Bergman, Catherine Bigelow. He genuinely likes his contemporaries and roots for them. He never thinks oh, this director is a hacker, or at least if he thinks that, he's not going to call them out or whatever. And one thing I don't know if you're really aware of with Marvel, T, is they are not really pro creativity. Two very infamous sort of Marvel movies that genuinely made people angry and upset is Thor 2 and Ant-Man were both being directed. Ant-Man was by Edgar Wright, who did, if anyone doesn't know, he's the one behind Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead and stuff. And he basically had, full reign to do Ant-Man, but he got fired because he was, Disney didn't like his new ideas. Same thing essentially happened to Patty Jenkins, who would go on to direct Wonder Woman.
Right.
And that actually pissed Natalie Portman off so much that's why she wasn't in any of the Thor sequels. The only reason she came back recently was because Taika Waititi was directing. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting too, because it's like they seem to give creative control to some directors. Like Taika Waititi had control over Thor Ragnarok, and Brian Coogler, the guy who did Black Panther, seemed to have like control over that movie. And in my opinion, that's what made those movies so successful. So one thing that Scorsese was kind of saying in his rebuttal, or not rebuttal, but like his explanation of what he meant.
His apology video. No, I'm just kidding.
More or less. I mean, The thing is, like, his initial comment was like in an interview for The Irishman. So it was just sort of an offhand remark. He didn't really say much besides like, oh, they're roller coasters. That's not cinema. So this was him explaining his thoughts. Because he didn't, he heard people got upset about it, and this was published in the New York Times. But like, that's something he actually did kind of take issue with Marvel, is that they do not celebrate artistic creativity. It's a cog in a machine to make money. And a lot of his argument was kind of defending these filmmakers like Patty Jenkins and Edgar Wright. And he's kind of right. Very recently, I'm not going to talk about it too much because I'm going to be reviewing it for our end of the year episode. But very recently, Doctor Strange 2 just came out. And the director for the first one was a horror director who was going to direct Doctor Strange 2, but they kicked him off the movie so that... Oh, goodness, what's his name? Why do I always blank on this? It's the director of the old Spider-Man movies. Anyway, like the director of Doctor Strange 2, he directed all the Spider-Man movies. There was a bit of a resurgence in popularity for those because of the new Spider-Man thing. So they basically were like, hey, do you want to direct this?
And
he's
Raimi?
like, sure. Sam Raimi, thank you. So because Raimi agreed, they just booted this other guy off the movie. Despite the fact he'd been working on it for years and everything, they were just like, yeah, Raimi said yes, so fuck you, essentially. And he went on to direct this year The Black Phone, which I haven't seen, but apparently it was very good. So that's kind of an argument Scorsese has that I actually think is worth criticizing Disney over, because they really don't let you have to toe the line unless you're famous enough or popular enough where you can do something different.
Like J.J. Abrams and screw everything up.
Exactly. Like it's so, and Star Wars is kind of an extension of this too, right? Where it's like, there's not really a lot of new ideas coming out. So, feel free to continue to tell Scorsese to suck it all the time. But one thing, I do think he has pretentious taste, right. But I don't think he is a pretentious... I genuinely think he likes other directors and likes to... One thing I told you about him that I thought was really interesting, and I actually started doing it after I heard he did this, was even when he was a working director, one of his assistants' jobs was to tape things for him to watch. Mm-hmm. Because he just is like, I want to keep watching new things, like to learn from them and stuff. And I think that's kind of very telling about him, where it's like he could go to a Spielberg movie and not see him as competition, but as a colleague. Right. He might have an opinion about Marvel movies. And he was, again, in his rebuttal, he was like, they're just not for me. Like, that's, if I'd grown up on them, I'd probably feel differently.
But see, that's what he should have said the first time. And
well, the first time it was just it was a question for, it's kind of like taking something you say out of context, Like, he was doing a press run for The Irishman, and someone asked him about Marvel movies, and he's just like, those, again, it's like, it might not have been the calmest way to talk about it, but it's also like, I don't think he was really expecting a question about Marvel movies.
Right. Well, I mean, not to put my tinfoil hat on, but like, as you and I have grown up in the YouTube era, we have seen many an apology video, so I still have to wonder about his sincerity and all this, if it was true or if it was damage control. Not trying to be too tinfoil hat there.
Well, frankly, I don't think that the people who watch Marvel movies and the people that watch his movies, there's much of a crossover. Right. So I don't really see what damage control he could be doing.
That's true.
You know, I like, and again, I even said this at the time he said it. It's like, it's a shame he feels that way, because there are some Marvel characters I think he would do a really good job if he were to direct. And he's probably one of the only directors Disney would give any creative control to, ironically.
Well, but that's one thing about people being a cog in the machine. I would agree with.
Well, I know that was my word. That was my words.
Well, no, I know, but that was his sentiment, though. Is basically
exactly.
I would agree with that if he hadn't done his movie at Netflix, because Netflix just saw him as a cash cow. They gave him creative control, but not because they believed in his project. They just saw him as But at the same time, I think that was, because that's the thing too. Like, I think Netflix, that was the only, despite him being Martin Scorsese, I think they were the only ones who were willing to make The Irishman with him. I think everyone else said no. I mean, after seeing it, that makes sense.
For sure. But you know what I mean?
It really should have been a mini-series. But
exactly, I completely agree with that.
I do think he does think that movies are above TV, like he didn't want to lower himself to TV. I do kind of get that impression.
I don't know about that. He watches TV voraciously.
I mean, everybody watches TV, but
no, but you know what I mean. Anyway, feel free to still feel your feelings. I
gave
felt
me
like
some
this
stuff
would be,
to think about, though. You did give me some stuff to think about.
I felt like this was a fun thing to talk about with this, especially with your feelings on that particular incident. But you know, like, there are directors with egos. Most recently, I think you and I both have had a change of heart about Ridley Scott after because he has really kind of gone mask off as far as him thinking he's better than everyone else. And again, like, I do think Scorsese probably likes more artsy fartsy pretentious movies.
Right.
But again, like, he seems to genuinely care. And that was another thing in my notes too, is like, he wants variety for there to be a shot for smaller directors.
Right.
Which, you know, Netflix, it was almost kind of a joke for a couple of years that it's like, if you sent anything to them, they would greenlight it, which is kind of what got them into trouble.
Right.
but you know,
I do love, though, they finally classified The Irishman as a vanity project. Because that was supposed to be the thing that legitimized them as a serious studio, and it won nothing.
Well, and it's funny, too, because like you don't like Roma. I think Roma's a better film than The Irishman. I think Buster Scruggs is really good, too, and that was the Coen brothers. Anyway, like,
if Roma had been made a couple years later, when there was more of an attention being put on minority voices in the Academy, I think it may have won Best Picture. But at that time, it was still just relegated to foreign film.
There was a whole thing with Roma. The lead actress was not only Mexican, but indigenous. So that was like another thing, having her up for Best Actress. You know, it's one of the, I don't expect you to like it. I liked it a lot, but, you know, different strokes for different folks. But one thing about Scorsese,
I'm a Mexican and I didn't like it.
Which is fine. But the thing about Scorsese I just kind of wanted to talk about is, like, again, as I said, I think his taste is pretentious, but he does not seem to like think he's better than other filmmakers. You know what I mean? And maybe it's from all those years of not winning Best Director.
It was humbling.
Probably. And also, like, you know, we never saw the numbers for The Irishman, but if they're willing to admit that it was a vanity project, it's probably a good sign that it did not do very well viewership wise.
Well, I'm telling you what happened. People put it on for like 30 minutes and then turned it off. Because I don't think that I think there was a lot of people not finishing it. Like, I know there were diehard cinephiles and people that finished. And I told you, I went and paid to go see it because I knew I would not. If I had to watch it in my house, I would keep pausing it, walking off, and doing something else. But I'm pretty sure, because I know, like with Roma, after Roma came out, they changed what they considered a view. And I think it was for the same reason, because I don't think people were finishing Roma. They would, especially because that opening scene is like 15 minutes of a wet floor. They used to count it like as a certain percentage of the movie is considered a view. And then they changed it to like if you watch like I think 10 minutes of it, that's considered a view. But that happened after Roma came out. And I'm pretty sure it's because they wanted to announce these big numbers and they couldn't do it with their previous system.
For sure. And that's interesting too, when in this last year they released the most watched, like actually legitimately like binged through shows, and a lot of it's foreign television, Korean dramas. There's that French detective show. There's Money Heist, which I'm still mad that they don't call it what they call it in Spanish because it sounds way cooler.
What is it called in Spanish?
Casa de Papel, like House of Paper.
Oh, that actually does sound cool.
It sounds so cool.
Money Heist just sounds like that really bad movie that came out years ago called Hurricane Heist or something.
Well, Money Heist sounds like one of those like fake movies. You would see it like, you know what I mean? Like an asylum
in a movie. Yeah.
Yeah, or not even in a movie, but like one of the budget ones that's like on the, you know, you're at the video store that doesn't exist anymore, and it's like
the low budget, you know, ripoffs. Like,
well, the ones where they're trying to trick you.
Yeah, you couldn't rent Ocean's 11, so see Money Heist instead.
Exactly. And that's the other, like, again, we could talk about all the big filmmakers going to Netflix and stuff, but that is something about the cinema ecosystem today that is kind of true, is that mostly it's streaming that's giving, you know, chances to smaller directors. If it's a big cinema release, it's got to be a big franchise. It's got to be Marvel or DC or James Bond or whatever, you know, Transformers 10. Like, if you want to see like a film by like an up and coming filmmaker, oftentimes it's streaming or nothing, you know, the way, and that is kind of sad. And I think that's also kind of what he was getting at in his explanation of, you know, what he thinks of Marvel movies is it's like the theater has kind of become like the theme park. You go to see, which again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it is kind of sad, like where, you know, like, I mean, even go back to like a film like Titanic, where there is a thrill ride sort of angle to it, where there's a lot of amazing special effects and stuff, but it's just this romance based on an original story.
Right.
And you really don't get that anymore. It has to be part of some legacy IP. And again, like I just wrote notes like about what his whole article was in New York Times, but I think that's kind of what he was getting at.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Titanic because Titanic is considered a very good movie. You know, it's a very critically acclaimed movie. It's considered art, but it's also a huge pop culture movie. And one of my reasons why I said, you know, I don't think pop culture is inherently lowbrow. I mean, you can make lowbrow stuff using pop culture, but just pop culture. So I think the best cinema occurs when art and pop culture are able to simultaneously exist. And there seems to be right now, everything is either, you know, like you said, a big franchise, a big tentpole or something, or it's like these just really just obscure art house movies. It's like nobody can figure out how to do a middle ground right now. You know, even my favorite movie, you know, Gone with the Wind, it's considered high art. It's considered critically acclaimed. It's, you know, it's in the top 10 at AFI of movies ever made. But it was also a movie that was basically just supposed to be, you know, pop culture-y, popcorny kind of movie. But again, it was one of these cases where they allowed art and pop culture to coexist with each other. And until we figured how to do that again, I think we're going to have some big trouble as far as movies goes. Because, like, to me, when I think of cinema, I think of art that's created for the masses to enjoy, you know, in this particular, you know, moving picture format. And I feel like a lot of films are now so niche that they couldn't survive a cinematic showing. I don't know if any of this is making sense to you.
No, I've actually got, mini counterpoint, but some of Scorsese's movies fall into the pop culture category. Of course, everyone's heard of Are You Talking to Me? Or, you know, that bit from Taxi Driver, or there's the whole, like, you think I'm funny? You think I'm funny? Like what? You know, so even some of his films have kind of fallen into that where they're, you know, become culturally relevant.
Right.
But the other point, is I'm looking forward to our end. I guess this is a mini plug for the final episode of the year. We're going to review all of the movies both of us have seen over 2022. But there's a couple of instances where I think there have been a couple of breakthroughs. I'm sure maybe you've heard of Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
Not a big major release, but it was so freaking popular that it was in theaters for like 6 months.
Wow.
You know,
yeah.
Major pop culture phenomenon, and it's essentially an independent movie. So it does happen. It's just kind of like you can't predict where it's going to happen and with who. And again, I'll get more into it when I talk about it in my review at the end of the year, but it's like, it does happen. It's just, I agree with you. It's very rare, and that's kind of what makes it difficult. Is it's like it's either you're a Marvel or like some tentpole IP project, or you're like this little indie thing that might be a great movie but doesn't make as much of a cultural impact because of the reach it has.
Well, the reach, or it could just be the way it's done, or something like that. You know, like, because like I mean, like 2 episodes ago, Mad Max Fury Road, again created to just be, as the director said, a 2-hour car chase. But it became culturally significant, critically acclaimed, and I'm pretty sure someday will be put into the American Film Registry.
True, but also it's the fourth Mad Max
It's
film.
the fourth Mad Max, though.
And it had major backing from Warner Brothers, so
no, but
still very happy for it.
That's still my point, though, is they allowed both these kind of artistic ideas and these, you know, mainstream ideas to kind of coexist. They people seem to like film, especially with what I've seen with a lot of up and coming directors. I kind of feel like they're almost scared of mainstream ideas, like entirely. Like that's why we get, like, you know, these really just movies about niche problems or niche this, or, and it's just like, and it doesn't, the only people who see it are like hardcore film people, but you know, they don't make an impact on it. And like I said, the ones that do make the most impact are the ones that are remembered even in film circles years later.
I think also part of the problem is so much stuff comes out that it's like hard to, which also, speaking of George Miller, I meant to mention this in this recording as well, but I literally, since we recorded Mad Max, he has a movie currently out.
Ooh.
He's off filming Furiosa right now, but you might want to check it out. It's called 3,000 Years of Yearning, and it's a genie movie. It involves it looks like Tilda Swinton finds a genie.
Okay.
And it sounds like it's like a romance movie. I've seen like a trailer for it, or an advertisement for it. It didn't really explain what it's about, but there you go. If you're curious for George Miller's new movie. The man who brought us
Babe can show me anything.
There you go. Well, it's apparently either about to come out or is currently out in theaters, so I know what you're watching this weekend.
Fabulous.
Well, anyway. So, back to the movie we're talking about.
Oh my god, yeah, that was like a 25-minute rant.
No, it's all good. Again, this is kind of what I was expecting. And frankly, this is a short movie. I feel like we've already, what I'm going to say now is, what do you give it? I recommend it, as I said, with, I think this movie's kind of underrated. If you like Scorsese movies or like dark comedies, check it out. I think rewatching it, I think I'd give it like a 3 out of 4 glasses of whiskey. Especially if you're someone who thinks The Joker is like the greatest film of 2019. I highly recommend you watch this movie and learn what a silly goose you are.
Wait, before we give the rating, because we got sidetracked, I want to talk about the ending.
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. Here's my big question. Do you think it's real? Do you think that is his fantasy? Or do you think he really did get famous?
I think he really did get famous.
Me too.
Because just the way American culture is, they would totally latch on to the guy that tried to abduct this one guy. I mean, especially back then. Nowadays, probably not.
Well,
they would be canceled so fast.
Do you know what makes me think that it's real? Is that if it was one of his fantasies, it would be so over the top. I don't think he would have gone to jail if it was his fantasy. You know what I mean? They would have been like, that was the most amazing set of comedy I've ever seen on television. You're not going to jail. I'm
Jerry
letting you
comes in and is like, I'm dropping the charges.
He's like, that was the most fun I've ever had, like, or whatever. Like, so because he still faced some consequences, I agree with you. I think that was actually real at the end. But I did think it was kind of neat how you've seen so many of his delusions in his head, and it's almost kind of shot like one of them, where it does make you think, like, well, wait a second. Is he, like, imagining this from his holding cell or something?
See, I would have believed that if he had narrated it himself, but he doesn't. There's like a announcer guy that's talking about it. Now, I will say what I did find interesting was, especially with this taking place in New York, they talk about how he sold the rights to this for movies and books and made several $1 million. And I was like, okay, this is 1983. In 1977, they passed the Son of Sam Law, which prohibited people from monetarily profiting from their crimes. So how did that happen? But then I'm like, yeah, it's a movie. These people probably didn't know.
Well,
I would just be like, I mean, come on, it's New York.
Dude, look at Tanya Harding, man. She's on VH1, like, narrating, like, TikTok gifs and stuff. Like, I don't think that law has been really put into practice. I mean, OJ wrote a book called If I Did It, and I know he was acquitted, but it's like, should you be allowed
technically, because he was acquitted, he did not commit a crime, therefore it doesn't apply to him.
But Tanya Harding was found guilty, and yet she can make a profit out of a movie about her. I don't know. To me, that seems like no one actually... It's one
of these laws where it's like it has to be a very specific set of circumstances. Basically, I think Tanya came out so far after it that it's no longer directly tied to the crime anymore. And because she's a public figure, they don't necessarily need her permission to make a movie about her.
It makes some sense. I just feel like there's some sickos who have definitely profited from their crimes, and I'm like, wait a second, they're not allowed to do that? I thought that
I do know for a fact there are workarounds for it, because the law just states they can't profit from it. But for example, there's been criminals who've sold their stuff, but like the money is given to a charity. Like they'll negotiate for several $1 million, but they don't see any of the money. It goes to like a charity or something like that. Which is weird. I'm like,
now that you bring that up, I'm gonna be looking at people trying to cash out of stuff like that.
I mean, that's how Lifetime makes some of their movies. Sometimes is they pay. I'm pretty sure that's how they do it. Is they pay a charity instead of the person.
Gotcha. But yeah, was there something else with the ending you wanted to talk about?
I kind of like the ending because I feel like if he had just gone to the other bit, the movie would be very... I mean, it is, in a way, it is tragic. But he's so likable. And like I said, it's established that he's not so depraved that he like wants to murder people or anything like that. You do want him to succeed. And you kind of really don't like Jerry, like in the movie at all. Like... I just got this impression, like, this dude looks like he cheats on his wife. That was basically like my opinion. You just want him to succeed, and there's something that's so just exhilarating about him finally getting his success. And even though it's kind of nefariously done, that it is self-made.
No one got hurt.
No one got hurt.
No one really got hurt. Again, like if he hadn't gotten out of his tape and his chair, he might have gotten sexually assaulted, but thankfully he was able to escape.
Right.
And also our hero had nothing to do with that. So,
Yeah, that was her just going off the rails.
So I'm feeling crazy. I'm feeling like anything can happen.
That's the point at which you leave. If you can, you leave, or you start chewing off your arm because you need to leave. No, but the ending, I did appreciate the ending a lot. And, and I really liked his comedy sex, and he talked about his comedy, and it's almost like you kind of expect it to be bad. It's almost like a twist that it's not. And I don't know, you're kind of just like, oh, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm in my head. I'm like, yeah, Rupert, I'm so proud of you. Yeah, make it happen.
As I said, when I first saw this, that was what kept me going. I was like, are they actually going to show his jokes? And when he did, he got a couple laughs out of me the first time I saw this, and more chuckles this time, but still good jokes. Like, as I said, my opinion of his set is basically exactly like Jerry's assistant says. It's like, oh, it's really good with some development. It could be amazing, you know? Like,
I was actually surprised because I think his assistant is played by, I think, Shelley Hack. And
yeah, it's weird that...
Or as she's known, the Charlie's Angel that couldn't act.
Well, do you know
what's... in this?
And maybe that's why, because I tried to write down all of the major actors, but she didn't come up for some reason, or at least she didn't have a profile picture on IMDb, so I didn't know who she was. So that explains that. I was thinking, she's a major character. Why am I not seeing that?
Well, now
anyway.
You know. Right,
so what would you give this movie? How many glasses of sweet tea out of 4?
Out of 4? I would give it 2.5 pitchers of sweet tea. And I would give it 3, except the beginning is so drawn out with this kind of one note thing about you know, about him being cringy and being disassociated. It's kind of like I said, you get the point pretty quickly what's going on. But what I would have liked to have seen to fill that time instead is how he got here, maybe. I don't know. Something about this, because no one is born, as far as I know, disassociated. Something happens. If we had some sort of flashback or something, I think that would have been more interesting.
For sure. But yeah, I think this was a pretty productive. I think we worked past some of your issues.
Oh my God.
I think
let's not get ahead of ourselves, but you did give me stuff to think about.
Right? Well, what do you guys think? Do you think Scorsese should suck it big time, or do you like this movie? Have you heard of this movie? Do you think Joker should have won Best Picture in 2019?
Oh my God.
If you're listening to this on YouTube, feel free to let us know in the comments. Hit us up on Twitter. Let us know if there's something you'd like us to review. But otherwise, hey, thank you for listening to us on whatever platform you choose. We've been Whiskey and Sweet Tea, keeping it Kino.
Suck it, Scorsese, even though this is your movie.
Suck it big time.
Yeah. Bye, y'all.
Bye, guys.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is produced by Alejandro Castillo, edited by Andy Reisfeld, and features original artwork by Ace Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks, and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.